You're welcome back to Hello Nigeria, and it's time for Top Story. On today's show, we have a special guest. We'll be discussing Nigerian-Canadian bilateral relations with His Excellency, the Ambassador, the High Commissioner of Canada to Nigeria, His Excellency, Mr. Calderwood. Yes, Mr. John Perry Calderwood. You're welcome to Hello Nigeria, Your Excellency. Hello? Hello,
yes, good afternoon.
Mr. Ambassador, good afternoon. You're welcome to Hello Nigeria.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you on, Your Excellency.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Excellency, you've been in Nigeria for a while now. How would you describe your experience so far?
Yes, well, let me tell you, I've been in Nigeria for nearly 3 years now, and in fact, I'm approaching the end of my assignment. It's been a very exciting time to be here. The relations between Canada and Nigeria are very dynamic and very multifaceted, and during the 3 years I've been here, I've been very pleased to see a growth in interest on both sides in strengthening those ties.
Fantastic.
All right, so we know that you've been a diplomat with experience in several countries of the world, and Nigeria would be your 7th country, if I am correct. How have you been able to, what's your experience so far with being a representative here in Nigeria and in the other countries? And we also know that Nigeria is not the only country you're representing at the moment. How do you strike a balance between being a diplomat in all these countries?
Yes, well, my experience here has been very positive. As I said, we have a very multifaceted relationship, and I'm pleased to see that we're seeing growth in a wide range of areas. To give an example, the people-to-people ties are particularly strong between our two countries. I'm delighted that we have about 9,000 Nigerian students who are now studying in Canada. We have quite a significant community of Nigerians or Canadians of Nigerian origin in Canada now, and lots of visitors traveling in both directions. We also have a very robust and growing trade relationship. I see great complementarity between Canada's economy and that of Nigeria in areas such as mining and agriculture and renewable energy. So it's very encouraging to see growth occurring in these areas, and I think the potential is great.
All right, you just spoke about Nigerian students. You said we have about 9,000 Nigerian students studying in Canada. We know that you have an education fair that you organize from time to time, and I think this year we had the 12th education fair. Can you please tell us what the education fair is about?
Yes, for a number of years now, we've had an education fair every year in January. We usually do it in both Abuja and Lagos. And basically, that is an opportunity for Canadian educational institutions, universities and others to send representatives to Nigeria to inform potential Nigerian students and their parents and families about opportunities to study in Canada. These fairs have been very successful as a tool to get the word out about opportunities for study in Canada.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, we do know that just last year, Canada swore in a new Prime Minister, His Excellency Mr. Justin Trudeau. And in Nigeria, too, we have a new president who just celebrated his 1 year in office. Is there any significant difference in terms of bilateral relationships with Canada? And I do want to say that Mr. Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, is a good friend of Nigeria. He visited as a young boy back then when his dad was Prime Minister. Is there any significant difference we'll be seeing on the table right now that there's a new government in Canada and Nigeria in terms of relationships?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question? I'm not hearing you very clearly.
I said, should we expect any significant difference or changes in the way Canada and Nigeria do business now that we have new governments both in Canada and relatively new governments in Canada and Nigeria?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, last year was a landmark year, I think, for both of our democracies. It was particularly a particularly interesting experience for me to be in Nigeria during the first democratic transition from a president of one party to that of another. I think that was very historic. As you mentioned, Canada too had elections last year. For us, it was perhaps not so historic in that we've had many changes of government over our 150 years of democracy. But we have a new government in Canada as well. And the change of governments in both countries offers an opportunity to renew the relationship and to look for ways to build it. As a matter of fact, shortly after our elections last October, we had a meeting of our binational commission. A delegation from Nigeria traveled to Canada, and we sat down and reviewed the whole bilateral relationship with a view to identifying areas where we can build on it. So I very much hope and expect that in the years ahead, under the governments of President Buhari and Prime Minister Trudeau, respectively, that we will build the relationship further.
All right, Prime Minister Trudeau has been considered as one who is very open-minded and someone who has accepted a lot of immigrants so far. What would you say has been the challenges? We do know that we have some Nigerians who have moved over to Canada as well. How would you assess their behavior there in Canada? And what would you say have been the challenges that you have faced so far with respect to immigration?
I'm sorry, I'm afraid I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat it, please?
All right, I was asking Prime Minister Trudeau. People say that he's very warm-hearted, and Canada has been Canada has been very receptive when it comes to issues of immigration. So, what do we say about Nigerians who have moved to Canada? How have they been behaving over there, and what are the challenges that you may have faced in the issues of immigration?
Yes, well, Canada throughout her history has been very much a country of immigration. We've received large numbers of immigrants for many years. We started off as a country that was primarily a country of the descendants of French and British settlers and our indigenous people. But in recent years, we've seen immigration from around the world. And there's no question that our policy of receiving significant numbers of immigrants will continue under the new government. In fact, I would say that there's a very broad consensus in Canadian society that we are a country of immigrants and that we look forward to continuing to welcome immigrants. Incidentally, an important element of our current government's international policy is settling some 30,000 Syrian refugees into Canada. Just within the last few months, 30,000 have been brought across to Canada and are settling into our country. With regard to Nigerians specifically, as I mentioned, there is a significant Nigerian community in Canada. And on the whole, they're very successful. They integrate very well into our country. A number of them are leaders of business. They're in academia. They're in the cultural world. And they very much enrich our society.
All right. We'd also like to ask you, basically, now that we know that, like you mentioned earlier, I'm taking you back to the area of education. You mentioned that a lot of our students have come there to study. What do you think it is that makes your country seem so attractive for Nigerian students? Because here in Nigeria, we would also want to make improvements as well. So what do you think it is that you have that we might learn from in area of boosting our education sector?
And is there any cooperation between Canada and Nigeria? I do know you cooperate in terms of mental health, security, and other measures. But in terms of education, is there any like exchange program and any specific measures you offered in order to help improve the education system in Nigeria?
Yes, I'm sorry, I really haven't heard the question.
Okay, so we're asking what are the things that you think we can learn from Canada with regards to boosting our education sector? Because we do have a lot of our students running. We've had a lot of our students go to study in Canada, and would like to see what do you have in Canada that makes your education sector so attractive, and what are the incentives for Nigerian students studying in Canada?
Yes, if I understood your question correctly, I think you're asking what Nigeria can learn from Canada in terms of our educational system. It's a very large question, but I guess the short answer is that Canada for many years has made education a very high priority. We have a very well-developed public education system. In fact, very few Canadians go to private schools. Our government has invested heavily in the public education system, starting from the earliest levels. A second point I would make is that we've realized in Canada that it's so important that our post-secondary educations offer programs of study that are aligned with the needs of the economy, to avoid a situation where you have a lot of people graduating with diplomas that are not relevant to the needs. We have very well-developed partnerships in Canada between our educational institutions and government and the private sector to consider together what are the skills and the programs that need to be offered in different parts of the country in order to produce young people with the skill sets required to meet the needs of the local economy. And it's an area where I think we've done very well and where I think we have experiences to share with other countries such as Nigeria.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador Calderwood, you currently serve as the Canada's ambassador to Equatorial Guinea, even though you're still Canada's ambassador to Nigeria. How is it possible to manage such a portfolio, and what challenges do you face doing that?
I'm sorry, I haven't heard the question.
Yes, I said you're currently ambassador of Canada you're the High Commissioner of Canada to Equatorial Guinea, even though you're still in Nigeria, even as you're Canadian High Commissioner to Nigeria. How do you manage to do both? I don't think he...
Hello, sir? Hello? Okay, it does seem that we have lost his call.
Connection.
Lost the connection. All right, that's
Okay.
been a very, very eye-opening interview and interesting
Very,
one.
very interesting. And I wanted to ask, on a lighter note, what Nigerian food he finds appetizing.
Yes.
Since it's been here for quite some time, 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, this wouldn't have been a lighter note, but I would have loved to ask what Canada's input with, in the area of fighting corruption would be, because we know there are several countries that have pledged to join Nigeria in the fight against corruption, and if they do find looted funds in their country, they would return it to Nigeria. So I wanted to find out what exactly would be Canada's role to play in our fight against corruption. But then again, I'm sure we would have...
I'm sure we'll get to talk to him some other time. It's been a pleasure talking to the Canadian High Commissioner to Nigeria, Mr. Perry John Calderwood, and we hope to have him back. And we hope to have him possibly in our studio with us. Oh, yes. All right, we'll go on a quick break. Our next segment, I was fortunate or privileged, or I had the opportunity of baking you a storm. Now, it was a very lovely cake. Gbenga did not get to taste it because I did it alone. But I present to you how to make sponge cake on Hello Taste It. We'll be right back.
To enjoy more of these our Ubonge videos when you just watch, press this button to subscribe on top of our YouTube page. You go love her.